Hello everyone. In this video we are going to talk to you about how the learning story can be used to facilitate teacher, student, and parent learning conversations. Now this is something that was covered in a previous video, but the last video we did in this series was about a 4-minute video that was just a quick overview of this process. So this is meant to be a little bit more in depth. So what I'm going to do is start talking to you about how I can set this up in my demo account as the fictitious teacher, Jonathan Baxter. And if I take a look at my home screen, I can go into my home room, and what I will do is just walk you through the process, some of the things that I'm considering while I develop that learning story, how I go about it, how it originates, and basically the philosophy of using this method. So from within my home room right now, I have my class feed, and I'm strategically using my class feed on a daily basis just to show students what the suggested learning activities for the day might be. I'm also posting the weekly ADSB released learning activities. I'm posting those in my class library so that the students and the parents have easy access to what those learning activities are. So that's providing the students with access to the content. So now what I need to do is come up with a way for students to engage in that content, submit it to me, and then I can engage in a learning conversation back and forth with the student and possibly the parent as well. So for me, the purpose of this video, what I'd like to focus on is using the learning story, which is created from within the Evidence tab. So if I come up here to Evidence and I click into that, that brings me into my General Evidence window. From here, I can take a look at a list of all evidence items that I have already created. I can organize those, or I can click into the learning story. Now this tab right here that I'm hovering on, that is going to be the main focus of this presentation. But before I really start to dig into that, let me just click into new evidence right now. If I click into new evidence, this is where I start to create a brand new piece of evidence. And this is where I'm taking what would normally happen in a regular classroom setting if the students are physically in the class in front of us. Normally what would happen is we would teach a lesson, we have students engaged in learning activities, and we are going around and seeing how the students are functioning, whether they are demonstrating an understanding of the learning goals within these activities. And the evidence item within EDSB is a way for us to document that learning process for the student to see where the barriers are to their learning or where the successes might be. What we are proposing in this session is taking that, flipping it upside down, and instead of taking the evidence item as a documentation of student learning and then sharing it with the parent afterwards, we're talking about creating a learning story first and then using that as a means for the students to submit their work, and then we can check for understanding. And again, if this is kind of going fast and not making sense, I'll try to slow down as we go on. So from the beginning, I click into my New Evidence tab and I select all the students. I am intentionally selecting every single student in my class, and unfortunately there is no button to select all, so it's a manual process. I select every student and I click Next. That attaches all students in my class to this new evidence item. So what I'm doing right now is I am actually intentionally creating an evidence item that will be fired out to every single student in the class, and I'm going to share it at the end of this so that parents have access as well. What I would do is I come in here to browse my computer, and the reason I'm doing that is I am looking to possibly attach a document or some media, something that is showing the students what it is that they are looking at for the day or the week, depending on what strategy you would like to use. And I'll just model that in just a second. Here in this box is the write an observation. This is where generally in a normal classroom setting it would be an observation based on student learning. Here I'm using the observation to create the prompt. So for example, in this box I could say, here are your learning activities for the week. Please feel free to send me an audio clip, a video, or a text message within this window letting me know your understanding of the activity, something like that. So I'll just click out of that for a second. So this is what the new evidence window would look like with all of the students. I don't need to add any expectations. I could add custom tags. I'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later. And at the end, this checkbox here, that's the checkbox that would need to be clicked in order to turn this evidence item into a learning story. Without checking this box, Everything that I'm doing right now stays with me as the teacher and nobody else sees it. If I'm looking to intentionally send this to the students and parents, I need to make sure that I'm checking this box off and then clicking Save at the end. So just to show you how I would do this, I'll come back to this window in a second. If I click into the learning story right now, that brings me into the learning story of my entire class, and then it's a manual process of clicking the drop-down arrow and going through and checking them. So let me just drop into Mitch Chambers' learning story here for a second. I have a number of items that I have already shared with Mitch and Mitch's parents. It's now part of the learning story. I'm going to go through a couple of options that outline my thinking, and then I'll come back to how I created this within that window. If I start down here, let me scroll a little bit further. This is an example of taking one learning activity, sharing that learning activity, turning it into a learning story. If I was to continue with this method, that would mean on a 5-day week, if I have one language and one math activity each day, and I created a separate learning story for each, I would have 10 learning stories a week for this student. And that's just from me as Mitch's teacher. So something that should be mentioned right now is that the learning story is the collection of all shared evidence items for a student, and that includes all teachers of that student. So if a student has 3 or 4 different teachers who are attached to them, all of those teachers have access to this learning story. And if all of those teachers are using this same type of strategy, the learning story can become very big very fast. So with that thinking in mind, creating a separate item for each and every activity, I decided quickly that maybe that's not the option I want to go to. So I started to think, how can I change that? So this example right here that I'm showing is an example of how the learning story can be used, where you create one learning story for each student per week. So this prompt is the language and math activities for the week are posted in the homeroom library. Feel free to share your thinking with me through your learning story. So what I'm doing is creating one learning story for the student and allowing the student to use this learning story to show me their understanding of the different math and language activities throughout the week. So for example, Mitch has uploaded a post. Here's my Monday math. Underneath, Mitch has uploaded another post. Here's my Monday language. I can then come in underneath and I can start to engage with this content as the classroom teacher and start to respond to Mitch. Now the issue with doing it this way is there's one comment for Mitch's math, one comment for Mitch's language. If I come under here and start to leave Mitch feedback right now, I need to be very specific and very clear. Am I leaving Mitch feedback on his language or his math activities or both? So again, it's just a little bit of strategizing and figuring out what might work for you. So that's another method to possibly be considered. Up above, this is the latest one. This is an example where I'm taking a screenshot of the language activities for the week and I'm attaching it to a new evidence item. So that way Mitch can come in here, he sees exactly what the language activities are for the week. He also can access this within the class library, as I had mentioned earlier. And underneath, this is where Mitch can engage with the language content. I know it's language only. It's not mixed in with the math. It's kept separate. So Mitch has left an audio recording with his response. As the classroom teacher, I can come in, listen to that audio recording, and leave some feedback for Mitch and encourage him to maybe do a little bit deeper thinking with this. And in this example, Mitch has left an audio recording. I've responded, and then Mitch has come in and responded to my feedback and gone a little bit deeper with his thinking. So again, it's just a way, by creating the learning story, you're allowing students to engage with the teacher and have a conversation back and forth, and you're able to see what learning has taken place. So this example, I've taken the weekly language activity. Underneath, this is where I have done, actually it's just above, sorry. So I have the weekly math activity up here as one post and the weekly language activity as a second. So how I did that, what I did is I opened up the PDF of the weekly language activities and I used my snipping tool. Now this is something during the presentation yesterday, the question came up, what is the snipping tool? So if I just go into my start menu and start typing snip, the moment I type SN, my snipping tool appears. I click into that, I can click New, and I just literally start to highlight and drag, and I can create a new image. And that is what I saved. I went up to File, I saved that to my computer, and once I did that, let's get rid of that and back here. So that is how I embedded that image into my learning story. So those are just some strategies that you may want to consider to be able to set that up. So if I take you back to how I did that, let me go back to my EDSB homepage, click into my homeroom, into my evidence item, and I'm just going to again walk you through how I did that. I click into New Evidence, I select all the students, so I'm just going to pretend that I select all of the students right now, and I click Next. It brings me to this window. The observation is where I typed in the prompt. Here is your here are your language activities for the week. Feel free to submit your work in this window. Use the learning story. Looking forward to engaging in conversations. This browse my computer. This is where I get access to any documents I have in my desktop, and I can come up here and I can find there's my math and language activities for the week, and I can embed them that way. So that is how I added that into my learning story. For custom tags, I just want to make a quick note about this right now because this was not mentioned during the presentation, our Microsoft Teams meeting, so I wanted to touch upon this now. If I have math activities for the week, and this example is a grade 6 math example where the learning goals are all based on working with fractions. As a way for this to make sense for me and have to be able to organize this down the road, something I might want to consider is adding math or fractions as a tag. So I'm just going to go over this real quick because I don't want to start confusing people. From the All Evidence window, when I go into Evidence, as soon as I come down here, I can click on Edit. And when I go to Edit, this brings me back up to my original Evidence window where I created this. There's my document. Here's my observation that I've left as the math prompt. I've already added a tag, LAH Math. In other words, that's for my learning at home math. So later on when I go into this, I can take a look at each student's evidence for learning at home math. I can also maybe get more detailed and add a tag right now for fractions. As soon as I do that, there's my tag for fractions. I always make sure I come down here and click Save. What this means is that maybe down the road when I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, so I have a lot of work here in this student's learning story. How can I see all of the evidence of learning for fractions where it's not mixed in with the multiplication, it's not mixed in with division or anything else? I can come to my Organize tab, click on that, my drop-down arrow, I'm looking for Mitch Chambers, and because I have organized now by tag, I now have the same evidence that has been shared. It's now labeled by tag. If I don't use tags, that means that all of my evidence is going to be listed one after another, untagged, and I need to go through it and sort it individually to make sense of it. By adding that tag for learning at home math, learning at home language, or fractions, everything is sorted and organized for me within the Organize tab right here. So that's just a quick note about using tags. So now if I come back to the learning story, one of the questions that comes up is, okay, how do teachers know if a student has even submitted anything? Because the notifications at this time, as this video is being created right now, notifications are not very strong within EDSB in this area. But we are being told that that is being worked on as we speak. So we will be sure to update teachers and let them know when this is updated. So the easiest thing I can do is come back here to my EDSB homepage. And right now, the recommendation is from your homepage, you go to this My Students link. We call this the My Students Zoom. And when I click on this, that will take me into the My Student Zoom. And what I will do is in part 2 of this video, because these videos are limited to 15 minutes in length and we are coming up on that, so I'll pause right now and start part 2 with a look at the My Student Zoom and show you how we can use this for notification assistance.